At my father's retirement speech he said, "My son gets the business. My daughter? A job at Wendy's if she's lucky." My brother sneered, "She'd screw that up too." The room went quiet when the lawyer cleared his throat. 3 years after burying my mother, I was watching my father bury me. Not in dirt but in public humiliation disguised as family humor. The retirement party was supposed to crown Noah as the new king of Hammond Industries. Nobody mentioned it would also be my public execution, complete with an audience of everyone who'd ever known me. The grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel buzzed with conversations about quarterly reports and market expansions. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over faces I'd known since childhood. Uncle Marcus, who used to sneak me candy during board meetings when I was 8. Mrs. Peterson from accounting, who always remembered my birthday. Even my high school friend Jessica was there with her husband, both dressed in their Sunday best for what they thought was a celebration. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories about family justice and finding your voice. If you believe every daughter deserves respect and recognition, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. I adjusted my navy dress for the third time, the fabric suddenly feeling too tight around my chest. Dad stood at the podium, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile radiating the confidence of a man who'd built something from nothing. Behind him, a slideshow displayed photos of Hammond Industries through the decades, groundbreaking ceremonies, ribbon cuttings, handshake deals that built our family's fortune. 42 years. Dad began, his voice carrying easily across the room. 42 years of blood, sweat, and more coffee than any human should consume. The crowd chuckled on cue. I forced my lips into what I hoped looked like genuine amusement. He launched into stories about the early days. Sleeping in the office, missing family dinners, the risks that paid off and the ones that nearly broke us. With each anecdote, the audience leaned in closer. This was Daniel Hammond at his finest, the storyteller who could make a boardroom feel like a living room. Then came the part about legacy. "Now, I know you're all wondering what comes next for Hammond Industries," he said, pausing for dramatic effect. The room fell silent except for the soft clink of wine glasses being set down. "Well, I'm proud to announce that my son Noah will be taking over as CEO, effective immediately." The applause erupted like thunder. Noah stood up from his seat at the head table, his chest puffed out in that way that reminded me of a peacock showing off its feathers. At 35 he had Dad's strong jaw and Mom's dark eyes, plus an MBA from Wharton that he mentioned in every conversation. He waved to the crowd like he was accepting an Oscar. "Noah's got the vision, the education, and the drive to take this company into the next century," Dad continued, his hand resting proudly on my brother's shoulder. "He's been preparing for this moment his entire life, and I couldn't be more confident in his abilities." I clapped along with everyone else, my palms starting to sting from the forced enthusiasm. Jessica caught my eye from across the room and gave me a sympathetic smile. She knew what was coming next, or rather what wasn't coming. Dad's gaze swept across the room before landing on me. "Now, some of you might be wondering about my daughter Sophia." A few heads turned in my direction. I felt heat creep up my neck. Well, Sophia's always marched to the beat of her own drum. She's got other interests, other talents. He paused and I could see the joke forming behind his eyes like storm clouds gathering. "She's always been more of a Wendy's type, if she can manage to show up on time." The laughter started as a ripple and grew into a wave. Someone near the bar actually slapped their knee. I heard Aunt Carol's distinctive cackle from the back of the room. Even the waitstaff smiled as they refilled champagne glasses. My face burned, but I kept that practiced smile plastered on. I'd perfected it over years of family gatherings where I was either ignored or turned into the punchline. The muscle memory kicked in. Tilt your head slightly, crinkle your eyes just enough to look like you're in on the joke, keep your shoulders straight. But inside something cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like ice on a pond when spring arrives, creating those thin lines that spread and spread until the whole surface gives way. Noah rose from his seat, champagne flute in hand, his grin wide enough to split his face in half. "You know what, Dad?" he said, his voice carrying that artificial warmth he used during client presentations. "Let's toast to new beginnings." He raised his glass higher. "To Dad, the man who built the empire I now get to run." The crowd murmured approval. "And let's wish Sophia luck on her next fast food adventure." Maybe this time she'll make it past the training period. The explosion of laughter was even louder this time. Someone actually started a slow clap. I watched Jessica's face fall, watched her husband elbow her to stop frowning. Across the room, Ryan Mitchell, our family lawyer, sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound cut through the laughter like a knife. For a moment the room quieted, expecting me to say something, to defend myself, to throw my own barb back, to play the game the way family gatherings demanded. Instead I picked up my champagne flute and raised it. "To family," I said, my voice steady and clear. I took a sip, set the glass down and sat back down. The applause resumed, conversations picked up and the party moved on. But something had shifted in that moment of silence. Ryan was still watching me, his fingers drumming against his water glass in a rhythm I didn't recognize. Across the room, Jessica was whispering urgently to her husband, her eyes darting between me and the exit. At the head table, one chair remained untouched. Mom's seat, draped with white roses and baby's breath. The flowers were fresh, their petals still closed tight, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Everyone at the party assumed her voice had died with her 3 years ago, buried in Riverside Cemetery under a headstone that read "Beloved Wife and Mother." They had no idea how wrong they were. I smoothed my dress again and reached for my champagne. The glass was still half full, the bubbles rising steadily toward the surface, each one carrying something up from the depths below. The drive home from the retirement party took 15 minutes, but the silence in my car stretched it into an eternity. I pulled into the driveway of my small apartment complex, watching the automatic porch lights flicker on one by one as neighbors settled in for the night. 3 years ago, this wasn't where I'd planned to be living. When Mom got her diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, I'd packed up my life in Chicago without hesitation. My marketing job at a small firm could wait. My studio apartment with the view of Lake Michigan could be sublet. Family came first, or so I thought. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, complete with the faded purple walls and horse posters I'd hung in high school. "You don't need to do this," Mom had whispered during one of her chemotherapy sessions, her hand cold and thin in mine. But I did need to. She was my mother, and she was dying, and Dad seemed more concerned with quarterly reports than with the woman who'd stood beside him for 38 years. Noah visited twice a week, always bringing flowers and staying exactly 47 minutes. I counted. He'd kiss Mom's forehead, update her on business developments she was too tired to follow, and leave with promises to call that he rarely kept. Dad managed an hour on Sundays between golf and his evening news routine. I was the one who drove Mom to appointments, held her hair back during the worst days, and learned to make the ginger tea that was the only thing she could keep down. I became an expert at reading prescription labels and navigating insurance claims. But when Noah suggested we hire a full-time nurse, Dad nodded approvingly and said, "Good thinking, son. Sophia's not cut out for medical stuff anyway." The funeral drew hundreds of people. Mom would have loved seeing how full the church was, hearing all the stories about her kindness and generosity. Dad gave a beautiful eulogy about his beloved Elena, and how she'd been the heart of their home. Noah spoke about Mom's wisdom and grace. I wasn't asked to speak, though I'd prepared something about her laugh and how she taught me to make her famous chocolate chip cookies. After the burial, during the reception at our house, I overheard Dad talking to his golf buddy near the kitchen. "Elena handled everything so smoothly," he said, shaking his head. "I don't know how I'm going to manage without her organizational skills. Sophia tries to help, but she's not her mother." That night I started packing. "You're moving out already?" Noah asked when he found me folding clothes into cardboard boxes. "Dad's going to need help around here. He's got a housekeeper twice a week and neighbors who bring casseroles," I replied, not looking up from my suitcase. "Besides, you said I'm not cut out for taking care of people." "I never said that. You didn't have to." I found a one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes away, close enough to check on Dad regularly, far enough to breathe. But proximity didn't translate to inclusion. When Dad decided to renovate the kitchen, he asked Noah's opinion on everything from cabinet handles to countertop materials. When I suggested keeping Mom's recipe collection accessible, Dad patted my shoulder and said, "That's sweet, honey, but Noah thinks modern storage solutions work better." At family dinners they talked business while I served dessert. Market expansions, client acquisitions, staffing decisions, I might as well have been invisible. The few times I offered input suggesting a social media strategy or questioning a vendor's pricing, Noah would smile indulgently and change the subject. The worst moment came at the annual Chamber of Commerce Gala. I'd driven Dad since Noah was out of town, and we were seated at the VIP table with other business leaders. When Mayor Richardson approached our table, Dad stood to shake hands. "Dan, good to see you," the mayor said warmly. "And this lovely lady must be your daughter." "Yes, this is my other kid," Dad replied casually, his hand resting on my shoulder like I was a piece of furniture he was showing off. "Sophia keeps herself busy with various projects." Mayor Richardson turned to me with genuine interest. "What line of work are you in, Sophia?" Before I could answer, Noah appeared beside our table, having returned early from his business trip. "She's between opportunities right now," he said with that trademark smile. "Sophia's sweet, just not really business material. She's more of a creative type." The mayor nodded politely and moved on to discuss municipal contracts with Dad and Noah. I excused myself to the ladies' room, where I locked myself in a stall and cried for 10 minutes. Ugly, angry tears that left my mascara smudged and my chest aching. Then I splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick and returned to the table wearing that practiced smile. But late at night, when the house was quiet and sleep wouldn't come, I remembered Mom's words from those final weeks. We'd established a routine during her illness. I'd read to her every evening after dinner. Sometimes it was romance novels that made her laugh, sometimes poetry that made her cry. But mostly she just wanted to talk. She told me about growing up during the Depression, about meeting Dad at a church dance when she was 19, about the miscarriages she'd had before Noah was born. She shared regrets about dreams she'd abandoned and pride in the woman she'd become. And one evening, when the morphine made her unusually direct, she gripped my hand and said something I'd never forgotten. "If they ever make you feel small, don't scream. Don't fight. Don't beg for their attention," she whispered, her eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. "Outgrow them silently. Show them what they missed by not seeing who you really are." I'd nodded, not fully understanding what she meant but sensing the importance of her words. 2 years after her death, while cleaning out boxes in Dad's attic, I found something that changed everything. Tucked inside Mom's hope chest, wrapped in tissue paper, was an old leather ledger. The pages were yellowed with age, but Mom's careful handwriting was still clear. It was a record of her financial contributions to Hammond Industries. Not just the seed money everyone knew about, but ongoing investments, loans and share purchases spanning decades. When I mentioned it to Noah during a family barbecue, he barely glanced at the pages. "Mom had some pocket change in the company," he said dismissively, flipping burgers on Dad's new grill. "Nothing significant. You know how women were back then, they kept track of every penny spent on groceries too. But Mom had been meticulous about everything, and these weren't grocery receipts. These were business documents, notarized and filed, showing investments that totaled far more than pocket change." I started making copies, creating my own careful records. A year before Dad's retirement party, my phone rang during a Tuesday evening in October. Ryan Mitchell's name appeared on the screen, which surprised me. Our family lawyer had never called me directly before. "Sophia," he said without preamble, "your mother made me promise to keep something safe until you were ready to hear it. I think that time has come." My hands shook as I set the phone down. Ryan's voice had carried an urgency I'd never heard before, even during Dad's messy lawsuit with the Patterson Group 3 years earlier. "Can you meet me tomorrow? Millfield Cafe on 3rd Street. 2 o'clock. He'd paused and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Come alone, Sophia. This isn't something that can wait much longer." The next afternoon I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner booth with a view of the parking lot. Millfield Cafe was one of those places that tried too hard to be quaint, mismatched vintage chairs, chalkboard menus, and baristas with carefully curated facial hair. I ordered coffee I didn't want and watched through the window as Ryan's silver Mercedes pulled into a space near the entrance. He looked older than I remembered. His usually pristine appearance seemed frayed around the edges, his tie slightly askew, his briefcase scuffed at the corners. When he spotted me, he walked over with the measured steps of a man carrying something heavy. "Sophia," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. His hands were trembling as he placed his briefcase on the table. "Thank you for coming. You sounded serious on the phone. Is everything okay with Dad's estate planning?" Ryan's laugh came out sharp and bitter. Your father's planning is the least of my concerns right now. He clicked open his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope, yellowed at the edges and sealed with red wax. This was updated 6 months before your mother passed away. She made me swear on my children's lives that I wouldn't open it until... He paused, studying my face. Until you were ready to hear what she had to say. The envelope felt heavier than it should have when he slid it across the small table. My name was written across the front in Mom's careful cursive, the same handwriting that had labeled my school lunch bags and signed permission slips for field trips. She didn't tell Daniel or Noah about this, Ryan continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. In fact, she specifically instructed me to keep it from them until after I'd spoken with you. I stared at the wax seal, Mom's initial pressed into deep red wax that had cracked slightly with age. What is it? Open it. My finger slipped under the envelope's edge, breaking the seal with a soft crack. Inside were 3 sheets of cream-colored stationery and a smaller sealed envelope marked "For Ryan's Eyes Only." The letter was dated 18 months before Mom's death, written in her steady handwriting with the blue ink pen she'd used for everything important. "My dearest Sophia," it began, "if you're reading this, it means the time has come for you to know the truth about our family, about the company, and about the choices I made to protect your future." I pressed the letter against my chest for a moment, feeling the phantom warmth of her hand in mine during those final weeks. The cafe noise faded as I continued reading. "I have watched your father and brother dismiss you for years, and I have felt helpless watching them treat you like an afterthought in your own family. I should have spoken up more forcefully when you were younger, should have demanded they see your intelligence and capability. I should have protected you better from their casual cruelty. But I was a woman of my generation, raised to keep peace rather than demand justice. I thought if I stayed quiet and supportive, they would eventually recognize your worth on their own. I was wrong, and for that I am deeply sorry." My vision blurred. I set the letter down and reached for my coffee with shaking hands. "There's more," Ryan said gently. "Keep reading." "But silence doesn't mean powerlessness," the letter continued. "While they dismissed my opinions and overlooked my contributions, I was building something they never saw coming. Every share purchase, every investment, every financial decision I made was calculated not just for the family's benefit, but specifically for yours. The company they think belongs to your father and brother? Nearly 60% of it has been mine for the past 15 years. I looked up at Ryan, who was watching me intently. "Is this legal?" "Completely. Your mother was exceptionally thorough. Every transaction was properly documented, every share purchase legally executed." He slid the smaller envelope toward me. "But that's not all." Inside the second envelope was a will dated 6 months before Mom's death, long after the official will that left everything split between Dad and Noah had been signed. This document was notarized, witnessed, and filed with the county clerk's office. "She left everything to you," Ryan said quietly. "The house, the investments, the life insurance policies, and most importantly all of her shares in Hammond Industries. Combined with the additional shares she purchased in your name over the years, shares your father never knew about, you now control the majority stake in the company." The words swam on the page. I read them twice, then 3 times before their meaning fully registered. But the will we read after the funeral was superseded by this one. "Your mother specifically requested that I wait to reveal this until I felt you were emotionally ready to handle the responsibility." Ryan leaned forward. "She also left detailed instructions about how she wanted this information shared with the rest of the family." I folded the will carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Around us, the cafe hummed with afternoon conversations. College students discussing weekend plans, business people making deals over lattes, couples sharing desserts. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. For the next 3 weeks I carried Mom's letter with me everywhere. I read it during lunch breaks, before bed, while sitting in my car in grocery store parking lots. I memorized every word, every carefully chosen phrase that revealed years of quiet planning and fierce maternal protection. Some nights I wanted to burn it. The weight of her secret felt unbearable. The knowledge that she'd suffered in silence while building this elaborate safety net around me. Other nights I wanted to frame it, to display her words as proof that someone had finally seen me clearly. But mostly I realized Mom hadn't given me revenge. She'd given me justice. And justice, she'd written in the letter's final paragraph, deserves an audience. I called Ryan on a Thursday evening in November. I want to wait until Dad's retirement party, I told him. Let them make their speeches. Let them toast their assumptions. Let them have their moment of triumph. Are you sure about the timing? I thought about Noah's upcoming coronation, about Dad's smug satisfaction, about 3 years of being treated like furniture in my own family's story. I'm sure. We'll read her final words out loud in front of everyone who matters to them. It's going to change everything, Sophia. That's exactly what she wanted. The retirement party had reached that comfortable lull where dessert plates were being cleared and guests were settling into after-dinner conversations. Noah's cruel toast still echoed in my ears as I watched him work the room, shaking hands and accepting congratulations like he'd just won an election. Dad stood beside the cake table, his face glowing with paternal pride, completely oblivious to the storm about to break over his perfectly orchestrated evening. I caught Ryan's eye across the room. He was standing near the back wall, his briefcase at his feet, his posture rigid with anticipation. We'd rehearsed this moment in his office 3 days earlier, running through every possible reaction, every legal challenge that might arise. But sitting here now, watching my family bask in their moment of triumph, I felt my resolve waver for just a second. Jessica was laughing at something her husband had whispered, her hand resting on her wine glass. Uncle Marcus was deep in conversation with the bank president about interest rates. Mrs. Peterson from accounting was showing photos of her new grandchild to anyone who would look. These people had known me since I was a child. In 30 minutes they would never look at me the same way again. Ryan cleared his throat and stood up. The gesture was subtle, but something about his lawyer's posture commanded attention. Conversations began to fade as he walked to the front of the room, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. "Before we close this wonderful evening, I have one last matter to address." The room didn't fall silent immediately. A few people near the bar kept talking, assuming he was about to deliver standard legal pleasantries about retirement paperwork. But those closer to the front table began to quiet, sensing something in Ryan's tone that didn't match the celebratory mood. Dad looked confused but pleased. He probably expected Ryan to make some formal announcement about the company transition, maybe read a prepared statement about Noah's qualifications. He gestured for people to pay attention, his smile indulgent. "As many of you know," Ryan continued, "I've served as the Hammond family's legal counsel for over 20 years. During that time, I've handled numerous personal and business matters, including estate planning for Daniel and his late wife, Elena." A few people nodded. This sounded routine, expected. "However," Ryan paused, reaching into his briefcase, "there is a matter that requires immediate attention. A second will." The words hung in the air like smoke. I watched the confusion spread across faces as people tried to process what they'd just heard. Someone near the kitchen entrance actually laughed, thinking it was part of some elaborate joke. Dad's smile faltered. "Ryan, what are you talking about?" "Elena Hammond executed a second will 6 months before her death," Ryan said, pulling out the document I knew by heart. "This will supersedes all previous testamentary documents and was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk's office." "That's not possible," Dad said, his voice rising slightly. "The official will was signed in my presence. Elena left everything split between Noah and Sophia, with business interests transferring to me for management." "I have that will in my files," Ryan replied calmly. "However, this document is dated 6 months later and represents Elena's final wishes." Noah had stopped mid-conversation with the mayor's wife. His face had gone pale, and I could see him calculating the implications even before Ryan began reading. He'd always been quick with numbers. "That's impossible," Noah said, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "Mom never mentioned anything about changing her will." "Dad, tell him this is ridiculous." But Dad wasn't saying anything. He was staring at Ryan like he was watching a car accident happen in slow motion. Ryan opened the document, his glasses catching the chandelier light. "The last will and testament of Elena Marie Hammond, executed on March 15, 2021. His voice took on the formal cadence of legal proceedings. "I, Elena Marie Hammond, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils and declare this to be my final testament. The silence was so complete I could hear the ice machine cycling in the kitchen. To my daughter, Sophia Elena Hammond, Ryan continued, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all real property, financial assets, investment accounts, and business interests. He paused, looking up at the stunned faces around the room. This includes all shares in Hammond Industries, representing 62% ownership of the company. Someone's wine glass hit the floor and shattered. The sound seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the room. Suddenly everyone was talking at once. Whispered questions, shocked exclamations, confused murmurs that built into a crescendo of disbelief. All voting rights associated with these shares transfer immediately to Sophia, Ryan said, raising his voice above the chaos. Along with controlling interest in all subsidiary companies and investment properties. Dad's face had gone from confused to red to something approaching purple. This is nonsense. Elena would never, she couldn't have. He turned to me, his eyes wild. Sophia, you had to have known about this. Did you put her up to this? I opened my mouth to respond, but Ryan held up his hand. There's more, he said. Elena left specific instructions that this letter be read publicly. He unfolded a second sheet of paper, and I recognized Mom's careful handwriting even from across the room. My chest tightened as he began to read her words aloud. To my daughter Sophia, whom they have consistently underestimated, this is not a gift. This is recognition of what you have always been. The strongest, most capable person in this family. You have endured years of dismissal and casual cruelty with grace I could never have managed. You stayed by my side when others couldn't be bothered. You saw me as a person worth caring for, not just a role to be filled. Jessica was crying now, her hand pressed to her mouth. Several other guests were staring at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Some sympathetic, others calculating what this meant for their own business relationships with Hammond Industries. I watched your father and brother treat you like an inconvenience in your own family, Ryan continued reading. I watched them dismiss your ideas, mock your ambitions, and assume you would always be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw your way. I should have stopped it years ago, but I was a woman of my generation, taught to keep peace rather than demand justice. Now I am correcting that mistake. Noah suddenly stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is garbage, he shouted, his composure finally cracking. There's no way Mom would have done this without telling us. This is some kind of fraud, some kind of setup. Noah, Dad barked, but his son was past caring about appearances. She's been planning this. Noah pointed at me, his face twisted with rage. Probably for years. Manipulating Mom when she was sick. Taking advantage of an old woman who wasn't thinking clearly. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, but before I could respond, Ryan's voice cut through Noah's outburst. The will was witnessed by 3 independent parties, including Dr. Morrison, Elena's physician, who certified her mental competency at the time of signing, he said coldly. Any challenge to this document would require proof of undue influence or mental incapacity, neither of which exists in the medical record. Dad grabbed the microphone from the podium, his hands shaking. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. There's obviously been some kind of mistake. There's been no mistake, I said, standing up slowly. My voice carried further than I'd expected in the sudden quiet. Mom knew exactly what she was doing. Every eye in the room was on me now. I walked to the front, took the microphone from Dad's trembling hands, and looked out at the sea of shocked faces. I didn't say anything. I just smiled, not the practice smile I'd worn for years, but something new. Something that belonged entirely to me. The silence stretched on, and in it I could almost hear Mom laughing. The silence stretched on, and in it I could almost hear Mom laughing. Then I handed the microphone back to Ryan and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a room full of people who would spend the rest of the evening trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. The next morning my phone started ringing at 6:30. Dad's number appeared on the screen 12 times before I finally answered on the 13th call. Sophia, we need to talk. His voice was hoarse, probably from spending the night on the phone with his own lawyer. This whole situation is clearly a misunderstanding. Your mother was confused those last few months. She was sharper than both of us combined, I interrupted. Even with the morphine. Meet me at Brennan's office at 10. We can work this out like a family. But we'd stopped being a family the moment he decided I wasn't worth including in it. By noon I was sitting across from Brennan, Dad's lawyer for the past 15 years. He was a thin man with nervous hands who kept shuffling papers and clearing his throat. Dad sat beside him, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Miss Hammond," Brennan began, "while your mother's will appears to be legally valid, there are grounds for contesting it based on undue influence during a period of illness and medication." "Go ahead," I said simply. They did. For 3 months, Dad threw money at every legal avenue available. He hired handwriting experts to analyze Mom's signature. He subpoenaed medical records looking for evidence of mental decline. He even had investigators interview the nursing staff at the cancer center, searching for any sign that I'd manipulated Mom during her treatment. But Mom had been meticulous. Every witness was credible. Every document was perfectly executed. Dr. Morrison's notes showed her mental acuity remained sharp right up until her final week. The investigator Dad hired actually called me personally to apologize for having to ask such intrusive questions. "Your mother was clearly a remarkable woman," he said. "I wish I'd had the chance to meet her." Meanwhile, Noah was making his own kind of trouble. He appeared on 3 local news programs, claiming I'd stolen his inheritance through emotional manipulation. He gave an interview to the Business Journal painting himself as the victim of a greedy sister's scheme. He even showed up at the Chamber of Commerce breakfast to deliver a speech about family loyalty and justice. But newspapers print retractions and people remember facts longer than accusations. The documents Ryan had filed with the court were public record. Anyone could see that Mom had been transferring assets to my name for years, not months. The timeline made Noah's story impossible to believe. While they wasted time and money on legal battles and publicity campaigns, I was learning to run a company. The morning after Dad's failed court challenge was officially dismissed, I walked into Hammond Industries as its majority owner for the first time. The lobby felt different when you owned it. The marble floors I'd crossed hundreds of times as Dad's forgotten daughter now belonged to me. The reception desk where Martha had worked for 23 years was mine to keep or change. The executive elevator that had always felt like traveling to foreign territory was now taking me to my own office. But I didn't start with the executive floor. I started in the warehouse. "Good morning," I said to Tommy Hernandez, who'd been loading trucks for Hammond Industries since before I was born. "I'm Sophia Hammond." I wanted to introduce myself properly. He looked confused, not because he didn't know who I was, but because no member of the Hammond family had ever sought him out to shake his hand. "Yes, Miss Hammond. I heard about everything. I hope you'll stay on," I said. "This company runs because of people like you and I want to make sure you know that." By lunch I'd shaken hands with every employee in the building. I learned that Janet in accounts receivable had been handling 2 people's worth of work since Noah refused to approve hiring a replacement for her retired partner. I discovered that the maintenance crew had been asking for new equipment for 3 years, only to be told there wasn't room in the budget. I found out that Maria in customer service spoke 4 languages and had been suggesting we expand into Hispanic markets, but no one had ever listened to her ideas. The changes I made weren't dramatic, but they were immediate. Janet got her assistant. The maintenance crew got their equipment. Maria got promoted to head of our new international outreach division. And Joanne Williams, whom Noah had once dismissed as too soft for management, became my new VP of operations. "I can't believe this is happening," Joanne said through tears during our first official meeting. She was 47, had worked at Hammond Industries for 12 years, and had been passed over for promotions so many times she'd stopped applying. "Noah always said I didn't have the backbone for leadership." "Noah was wrong about a lot of things," I replied. Dad's forced departure from the office was perhaps the most difficult part of the transition, though not for the reasons I'd expected. I'd imagined feeling triumphant watching him pack his things, but instead I felt hollow. This man who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with algebra homework, was carefully placing his golf trophies into cardboard boxes like he was packing up his entire identity. "The retirement package your mother designed," he said without looking at me. "Ryan mentioned it. It was generous. More than generous. Mom had calculated exactly what Dad would need to maintain his lifestyle without the company income. But it was a pension, not ownership. Security, not power. She thought of everything," he said quietly. "She did." He paused at the door, a box of personal items in his arms. I should have seen it coming. She always was smarter than I gave her credit for. She was smarter than any of us gave her credit for. A month later, Noah appeared on my doorstep. Gone was the angry man who'd shouted accusations at the retirement party. This Noah carried a bottle of expensive wine and wore the carefully constructed smile I remembered from his sales presentations. "Sophia," he said, "I think we got off on the wrong foot with all this." I let him inside, made coffee, and listened while he delivered what was clearly a rehearsed speech about family bonds and moving forward together. He suggested I might need experienced leadership during the transition. He offered to stay on as a consultant. He even apologized, sort of. "I may have reacted poorly at the party," he said. "It was just such a shock, you know? I always assumed we'd run the company together someday." "You assumed you'd run it and I'd stay out of your way," I corrected. His smile flickered. "That's not. I mean, we never really discussed." "Noah," I said gently, "if you had stood up for me once, just once, in all those years, none of this would have been necessary." "What do you mean?" "When Dad introduced me as his other kid. When you laughed about me working at Wendy's. When they dismissed every idea I had without even listening. If you had said, 'Actually, Sophia has a point,' even one time, Mom might not have felt the need to protect me this way." He stared at me for a long moment and I saw something shift in his expression. Not understanding exactly, but recognition that his apology had come too late and meant too little. I walked him to the door, thanked him for the wine and closed it quietly behind him. 6 months after taking over Hammond Industries, I made one more change. The sign outside our headquarters had read Hammond Industries, founded 1981 for as long as I could remember. The brass letters were elegant, substantial, permanent-looking. The new sign read, Elena and Company East 1981. People asked about the name change constantly. Business partners, employees, even reporters from the trade magazines. I gave them all the same answer. Because she built it too. The letters started arriving 3 weeks after the Business Journal ran their feature story about Elena and Company. The first one came in a lavender envelope, handwritten in careful cursive that reminded me of Mom's. Inside, a woman named Patricia from Nebraska wrote about watching her brother inherit the family farm while she was expected to be grateful for a small savings account. "Reading about what your mother did for you," she wrote, "made me realize I don't have to accept crumbs from my own family's table." By the end of the month I was receiving 5 or 6 letters a day. They came from across the country. Daughters who'd been passed over for family businesses, sisters whose brothers were handed opportunities they'd never be offered, nieces who watched their male cousins receive college funds while they worked part-time jobs to pay for community college. Each letter was different, but they all carried the same underlying message. "Thank you for showing us it's possible to claim what's rightfully ours." Margaret from Oregon wrote about confronting her father's business partner who'd been excluding her from client meetings despite her MBA and 15 years of experience. I walked into his office and said, "I'm not asking for a seat at the table anymore. I'm taking it." He was so shocked he just nodded. Sarah from Texas described finally standing up to her family's dismissive comments about her little hobbies, which turned out to be a successful online business she'd built while working full-time as a nurse. "I showed them my tax returns," she wrote. "They stopped laughing pretty quickly. But the letter that broke me came from a 16-year-old named Emma in Florida. Her handwriting was shaky, like she'd written it several times before finding the courage to send it. "My dad always tells people I'm the pretty one, and my brother is the smart one," she wrote. "But I have a 4.2 GPA and I want to study engineering. Your story made me realize that maybe the problem isn't with me. Maybe the problem is with people who can't see past their own expectations." I cried reading that one. Then I called Emma's high school and arranged for a scholarship counselor to meet with her about engineering programs. The scholarship fund started as a small gesture, something to honor Mom's memory while helping women who reminded me of myself at their age. I established the Elena Hammond Memorial Scholarship with an initial donation of $50,000. Targeted specifically for women pursuing business degrees who were supporting themselves through school. The first recipient was Lily Martinez, a 26-year-old single mother working night shifts at a packaging plant while taking business classes at the community college. When I called to tell her she'd been selected, she didn't believe me at first. "Are you sure you have the right person?" she asked. "I'm just trying to get through accounting class. I'm not special or anything." You're working full-time, raising a daughter and maintaining a 3.8 GPA, I replied. Trust me, you're special. When we met in person to present the scholarship check, I saw something familiar in her eyes. That determined exhaustion of someone who's been carrying more than their fair share for too long. She reminded me of the woman I'd been during Mom's illness, pushing through each day because someone was counting on me. This changes everything, Lily said, her voice thick with emotion. I was going to have to drop my Thursday evening class because they changed my shift schedule. Now I can cut back my hours and focus on school. What do you want to do when you graduate? I asked. Run my own business someday. Something that gives other working mothers flexible schedules, you know? Places where you don't have to choose between being a good employee and being a good mom. I wrote her a second check that day, seed money for her future business plan. The healing happened slowly in ways I didn't expect. 18 months after taking over the company, I realized I could think about Dad and Noah without feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. The anger had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of weary acceptance. I saw them for what they truly were. Men who'd been handed success so early that they'd never learned to recognize it in others. Dad had inherited confidence from his father, and Noah had inherited it from Dad. Neither of them had ever been forced to prove themselves the way I had. In some ways I almost pitied them. But pity didn't mean reconciliation. When Dad called on my birthday, the first contact we'd had in 8 months, I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I hope you're doing well. I saved the voicemail but didn't return the call. Some relationships, once broken, can't be repaired. They can only be grieved and released. Noah's overtures were more persistent but equally futile. He sent Christmas cards signed "Your loving brother" and LinkedIn connection requests that I quietly declined. Once he showed up at a networking event I was attending, approaching me during the cocktail hour with that familiar salesman's smile. Sophia, you look great, he said as if we were old friends catching up. The company seems to be doing well under your leadership. It is, I replied simply. I've been thinking we should get together sometime. Maybe grab dinner and talk about the future. What future would that be, Noah? His smile flickered. Family is family, right? Mom wouldn't want us to stay estranged forever. Mom is exactly why we'll stay estranged, I said and walked away. Every Sunday morning I drove to Riverside Cemetery with fresh flowers and a cup of the ginger tea Mom had loved during her illness. Her headstone was simple, Elena Marie Hammond, beloved mother. But I'd added a small bronze plaque that read Founder Elena and Company. I told her about the business growth, about the scholarship recipients, about the letters from women who'd found their own courage. Sometimes I shared funny stories about office dynamics or frustrating vendor negotiations. Other times I just sat quietly, feeling connected to something larger than myself. The Patterson Group wants to buy us out, I told her on a particularly gray February morning. They're offering twice what the company was worth when you left it to me. But I told them no. This isn't about money anymore, Mom. It's about building something that matters. The wind rustled through the bare branches above her grave, and I could almost hear her approval. But the most profound change was in my own voice. For 32 years I'd spoken primarily to defend myself, to explain why I deserved consideration, to justify my presence in conversations, to apologize for taking up space. Now, when I spoke at board meetings or industry conferences, it was because I had something meaningful to contribute. People listened differently too. When Sophia Hammond had an opinion, executives leaned forward instead of looking past her. When I suggested a new market strategy or questioned a proposed partnership, my words carried weight they'd never had before. At the Regional Business Summit that spring, I was invited to deliver the keynote address about innovative leadership. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of 300 industry professionals, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete ownership of my own story. My name is Sophia Elena Hammond, I began, and I was never meant to stay silent. The applause that followed wasn't polite or obligatory. It was recognition of the journey I'd traveled, the obstacles I'd overcome, and the voice I'd finally found. And somewhere in that moment I understood what Mom had known all along. Some gifts aren't about what you receive. They're about what you become worthy of receiving. I was finally worthy of my own life. If this story of justice and family courage had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Ryan read Elena's letter aloud, revealing how she'd been planning Sophia's protection for years. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.